Welcome everybody to Alfa Romeo 2000 onwards. So we'll be talking to Lloyd Vehicle Consulting with Joseph Lloyd, and we will be continuing our talk from the early Alfa Romeos to the more new modern ones, which you see from things like, believe it or not, now Stellantis, because that's it.
Yeah.
So much has happened in this last few years, hasn't it, Joseph?
I know. It's funny, Alfa Romeo is such a checkered history, and as we talked about on the earlier part 5 of these slightly shambolic sound recordings on the Planetauto channel, and I do recommend actually watching that on their channel before going in too much depth about this one, because otherwise it won't make too much sense. That they passed through so many hands. The Fiat group took them over in 1986, and they started to merge a lot of the products in the 1990s with Fiats and Lancias as well. And from late 2000s, we have this then merger with Chrysler, and actually a Dodge Dart coming off the Alfa Romeo Giulietta platform and things like that, which happened in the early 2010s. And now we're in 2021, and the merger of PSA and FCA has gone through. And so we're expecting to see, actually, rather than perhaps people thinking they might get rid of the Alfa Romeo brand entirely, it's certainly for Lancia was sort of rumored, that actually Alfa Romeo is going to come back better than ever. And we'll get on to talking a little bit about.
It's similar to Jeep as well in this country. They're pushing Jeep as much as Alfa.
They are, and we actually saw when we were at the Goodwood Festival of Speed in 2019, we saw the new Alfa Romeo Tonale, which is rumored for production this year, which will be great. And
it's changed quite a bit, hasn't it? Have you seen the latest pictures? To say, when we saw that, it was far more conceptual, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And this one looks more SUV rather than that raw cutting style that you see with a concept.
I think obviously we were aware even at the time that some of the features on the Tonale concept wouldn't make it to production.
No.
And obviously that always is the case generally. So
they were very protective, weren't they? We couldn't even get over the barrier in front of it. Nobody would even let us in.
No, we were actually wearing press armbands.
Yeah.
We were actually wearing press armbands. So you would have thought we would get a bit of exclusive access, but we didn't. We were just said you can't.
Oh no, that was under lock and key. We couldn't even see the back of it. And it was parked in a strategic way that you couldn't see certain parts.
Yeah, it's being very kind of sort of cautious about it, which I understand. The funny thing about Alfa Romeo now, in comparison with where we were in the year 2000, is that they don't really have many models on sale.
No. Mind you, that we've seen that a lot with manufacturers of late, haven't we? Especially with powertrain changes and things. Obviously moving more towards hybrid and electric, but it also, some of the manufacturers back from 80s upwards had 20 or 30 trim levels, didn't they? And so many options. And it just doesn't make perfect sense anymore to do that kind of thing, because the market's so much smaller for cars like that for some reason, especially in the UK.
Yeah, for some reason, Alfa Romeo's sales generally have been in a bit of a decline for quite a long time. And you go back.
I thought that would change with the Giulia, because that is beautiful.
Yeah, it's a great car, and you actually have reviewed on your channel both a Giulia. I think was yours a Lusso?
It was a Lusso, and it was a 200 Super, something like that.
Yeah, it was. I think it was it a 2-litre petrol, turbo. And there's a bit of a naughty thing when you do that, isn't there? You jump a bridge. Was you or Michael doing that?
It was actually, it was on Arnside Knot, and it was I wasn't planning on jumping it. Literally, it's a nice piece of road, and then all of a sudden on the left-hand side, because it's on the Arnside Knot, about 100 hikers decided to walk towards the road, and they don't normally stop for cars. They just kind of flow across. And we were filming, and I had people checking the road to make sure it's safe. We had a camera opposite, and I've had to shear off the left-hand side, because what I had to do was change sides of the trail and literally go over the bit which makes you go airborne. So
yeah,
I ended up airborne for a split second just to avoid these people who were not going to stop.
And the camera captured it, didn't it?
Yes, yeah. It's a remarkable shot, isn't it? Actually,
it's funny with that car that, you know, it is definitely part of the kind of new era of Alfa Romeo, the post FCA era, which started about 2009. That, you know, they reintroduced Alfa Romeo to North America, where they withdrawn in the early 90s, and it's a rear-wheel drive car. It's, you know, I think you can get four-wheel drive versions. The one I think you had was a rear-wheel drive, wasn't it? The one you had.
That was a rear-wheel drive, but the Stelvio was four-wheel drive.
Yeah, the Stelvio that you had as well, which I think is again on a similar platform to the Giulia. Some, you know, the Alfa Romeo experts out there might correct me if I'm not too good at Alfa Romeo's current range, but you know, you can get really powerful engines of both of those, and the quadrifolio versions of the Giulia and the Stelvio were ridiculous, aren't they?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, that's it. They gave us, I think it was 200 brake horsepower Giulia and about a 240 brake horsepower four-wheel drive Stelvio. And that was quick enough. You go for the quadrifolio and you're talking ridiculous power. And it's not just four-wheel drives. They do a rear-wheel drive one as well.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It's proper sort of roots, because after the 164 came the 166, and that's a front-wheel drive car, and it always was. The problem with that was, by this time, Alfa still have a bad reputation for sort of corrosion of things, and you know, 166s aren't actually that bad, but you know, other cars like the 147 are genuinely quite bad, unfortunately. You know, I've never seen a 2007 car with such bad suspension arm failure as I saw once on the Italia Auto's channel. As Jack Neil, who runs that, was looking at a suspension arm from a 147, and it was a 2007 model, and I've never seen rot like that on a car that at the time was about 13 years old. You know, for a modern one. I'm not talking about years ago, because you know, Lancia Betas were so bad that the company had to you know, buy them back from customers because the rust was so bad. But you know, it sort of puts you off buying these modern Alfa Romeos. And also 147 prices are really low. I've got a viewer who's offered me their 147 to film for the channel. I'm really looking forward to it. Unfortunately, I've just not been able to do it because of the current situation that we're in. And I was really looking forward to it, especially having done, you know, this, you know, 2020, I did 2 Alphas. I was going to do more, but again, things got in the way. So I did the 166, and also the 90. So, you know, I was looking forward to that. But never mind. 166 famously driven by Jeremy Clarkson on Top Gear. He drove a very late post facelift one that was a 3.2 Busso engine, dark blue with a beige leather interior. I think that car's still around, as far as I remember. But by that time, the sales were minuscule. I mean, they were selling like literally hundreds of 166s, not thousands a year in this country. And depreciation was so poor in comparison to like a 5 Series. That they just stopped selling it, and it's a real shame. The Busso engine ones are really difficult to work on as well. They require expert maintenance, and you know, a cam belt change on those is something like 11 hours.
Yeah,
absolutely ridiculous. And even changing an oil filter or an air filter is really difficult on a Busso engined 166, and they are astonishingly nice to drive. I mean, I've driven Mr. Coleman's one that's a lightly modified Sportronic Lusso 3-litre, and that is lovely. Again, just like a 145, the steering is amazing in one of those. They also do twin spark versions of it, but they don't tend to offer you too much of an advantage because the 166 is quite a heavy car, and so the fuel economy you save on a 2-litre isn't really kind of you know, that different from the 3-litre. Although the 3-litre, you know, has much higher maintenance costs because of the engine, but the sound of that car, as you know, having helped me out with some of the editing on that video, the sound of it is just lovely.
Yeah, what's getting me about Alfa Romeo moving forward is all these cars are moving towards electric and hybrid, and Alfa Romeo don't seem to be really doing it. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, I mean, last two cars that they have recently taken out of production, the Mito and the Giulietta. I think the Giulietta might still be on sale. I can't remember, but it's...
See, the Mito would be a perfect electrification style car. It's that kind of size.
It would be, but that was on an old Fiat Grande Punto and Vauxhall Corsa platform. And
we know that's how it's been, hasn't it? I mean, you've said that I've had quite a few Alfa Romeos. If you think about it, the Fiats have had as well. You know, like the 124 Spiders.
Yeah, and I know you've had quite a few of those on the channel, and perhaps if there's demand, we can look at Fiat in another one of these Shambolic sound recordings. But
well, that's the thing about not everybody knows what FCA encompasses, do they?
No, it's a huge company with all the Chrysler brands and Lancia and all sort of thing, which is why when the Delta and the Upsilon came into this country in 2011, they came as Chryslers rather than Lancias, because Lancia had been withdrawn in 1994, and there wasn't really.
The Upsilon's still being sold, isn't it?
Not in this country, but in Italy, yes, they're still selling it under the Lancia brand, because that is the second or third best-selling car in Italy.
Yeah.
And it's on a Fiat 500 platform or a Panda platform.
That's as we know, that is the perfect platform for Italy, isn't it? The small roads.
Yeah.
And nipping from village to village and so on.
Yeah. I mean, the time was when Alfa would definitely brought out a success to the Mito, but unfortunately they're not particularly reliable cars. It's a bit of a shame, actually. That's
the thing. Even our new Giulias and things were plagued by the end of it of things like the odd parking sensor going off inadvertently, which we thought would have been ironed out in these modern ones. It's interesting how they still have these quirks that you found in the 70s and 80s model.
That's right. And what I've heard, sadly, is that, Alfa Romeo dealers aren't necessarily the best. I mean, James Martin's got a video about this, and they are obviously trying to improve, all the time. And I'm very excited, really, about the new models that they're bringing out. But the FCA stuff did do some weird things, like the Dodge Dart, which was based on the Giulietta platform, for example, which unfortunately didn't do too well for them. But I'm more excited, really, about the new stuff, which actually I think is a bit of a clean sheet, away from sort of hand-me-down Fiat technology, like the Mito, like the Giulietta.
Encompassing more PSA technologies in Alfa Romeo and making something far more Alfa Romeo moving forward, rather than an amalgamation of other cars.
Yeah. Like the Mito was a classic example, really nice to look at, but the fundamental engineering and stuff like that wasn't the best. Whereas the Giulia was a brand new bespoke platform, and that has been a really well received car, as is the Stelvio, which is caught at the moment, because that's where the market's going. This
is why the Tonale is going to be a really exciting one, isn't it?
I'd say that will replace the segment that the Giulietta has exited. But if we look back at the 2000s, we had things like the 916 GTB and Spider still on sale, which were based on the old Tipo. But they to me always seem to get better and better looking. And I do have a review of a 916 Spider coming up on my channel at some point. I'm just waiting again for the opportunity to film it. I have been offered one by a viewer, and I'm really looking forward to it. It's a very late one. I think it's a 2004, which is the JTS engine, not the Twin Spark, which is more like a Fiat one as opposed to an Alfa Romeo development. And they had the Brera and the GT, which were, again, similar coupes a bit later on. The Brera, unfortunately, was one of the rustiest cars ever made, which is a bit of a shame. That's from Alpha Expert Mr. Cole, by the way. That's not being prejudiced. That's from Mr. Coleman. It's a shame. Alfred's went through this period in the late 2000s where the quality just wasn't there. And it's not a surprise that, say, a 166, the earlier ones tend to be better, but there's only 100 of them left in this country. And, people will just, with, bad quality, the reputation of dealers not the best, really bad residual values, and, bits of hand-me-down from wherever they could find them. It's not surprising the Alfa Romeo sales sort of went down. And, Alfa Romeo, I'd say now they're focused a lot better. Although their sales have decreased from a few years ago, I think they are a bit of a stronger brand than they were. And I really hope that.
Certainly,
I really hope.
What were your thoughts when you saw that Alfa Romeo had released essentially a supercar, the 8C.
It was very exciting, but unfortunately, it's just like everything else, it didn't quite work. Like the 4C as well, which
exactly.
Which again, I don't know really what happened with that. Again, these exciting, unique projects for Alfa Romeo, and they just didn't quite work. I don't know what to say really. It just sort of same story. The stylists amazing, the engineers, the chassis,
they were featured
amazing.
in all the games of that time, like Gran Turismo. You could get an 8C, and it was such a fantastic sounding car. And also, I mean, I met Clive Beecham down at Concord with Annabelle, and we were talking to him, and he's got a Disco Volante, and and it's basically based on the 8C.
Yeah, I know.
And it's such a fantastic looking vehicle, but it's the difference between night and day between the 8C and the Disco Volante. If you get a chance to Google it, Google Clive Beecham's Disco Volante, and I think it's worth something like 22.5 million, and lives in a study with bookcases round it, and is taken out on occasion by crane.
This is the thing about the styling of all these cars we've mentioned, even things, even like a Mito or a Giulietta, which have quite humble engineering. The Giulietta platform is the same as a Fiat Bravo, for example, and the Chrysler Delta that I filmed quite early on in the channel history. They just did something, just remarkable with the ingredients they were given, just made them a lot better to look at, a lot better to be inside. I mean, the interior of even Mr. Cod 166 is such a nice place to be. And I know, having watched videos of the Giulia and the Stelvio, that is the case for those two.
Well, they were definitely targeted more at business owners, weren't they, as company cars? They were trying to go after the 3 Series market, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know really whether a Giulia is more like a 3 or 5 Series size. It's probably a bit in between the two somewhere.
It's kind of in between. Yeah.
A bit like an Land Rover 75. That's sort of in between as well.
Yes.
But
well, I mean, they're dubbed as a mini Ferrari, and you can tell. I mean, even the doorways are smaller, and it's something about that car encompasses a mini Ferrari. It's really interesting when you get in one.
Yeah, and the Giulia also goes back to the 156, which we haven't mentioned so much. But I think it's one of the nicest looking saloon cars they ever made. I think it's an incredible car, 156. So 159, I think, is also a decent looking car. And
well, they always had interesting headlamp configurations, didn't they? That looked, I don't quite know how to say it. They were almost conceptual and looked like certain 90s Mercedes shaping. They have this really beautiful line on the headlamps and grille.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is
especially things like James's car, because I do love the front of that.
I know, some people, I actually prefer the facelifted 166, which I know is total heresy, and I have said that. I think his car is great, but I just prefer that slightly later look. They're very, very uncommon.
I think I go with the earlier one.
Yeah, I know most people would. They're very, very uncommon, in that form. I think they stopped production about 2006-7 without a successor, which is the Giulia eventually came. But there's documented history of people who've owned these cars, like Mr. Richardson Furious Driving. He's had a lot of them. He's had a 33. He's had a 156. Had a 159. He's had a lot of them, and he was really fond of them. But it's just a sort of shame that you really have to be an enthusiast to own virtually any Alfa Romeo, don't you?
You also have to have a never-ending bank account.
I know, exactly, and I'm pleased that the one that you've got is going to be saved and for posterity, because really that sort of thing belongs in a museum, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, that's it. But saying that, you do need to drive them to experience them, and there's so many people get these cars, restore them, and then stick them in a gallery.
Yeah, exactly. I think
you need to be able to do both sides.
Yes, exactly. I think, Mr. Quirk, sadly, our time for this.
Well, I think we've covered everything.
Yeah, we have.
The only thing we haven't covered is it's now all Stellantis, which we touched on at the beginning. Which did you see that coming?
The name, possibly not. I don't think so. I
think it's been trading in America, hasn't it, for some time, Stellantis?
Yeah.
But to have a European division.
Yeah, quite possibly. The thing is that we could possibly have an entire whole one of these
on the whole of
podcasts
Stellantis PSA
about Stellantis, because there's an awful lot to talk about. There's, I think, between 14 and 16 brands for that from that particular conglomerate now, and it's enormous. So possibly we'll do that in the future, but we don't want to go on too long today. And I think we've covered a lot of models in these two
It's been very
parts. Good. So as I've said, if you haven't already seen part 1 of this collaboration, then order to be called part 5, because these.
I was going to say it's probably part 5, but you need to see that on the Planetauto channel.
Exactly.
That's where we talk about early Alfa Romeo, and then we move on to 2000 onwards in this one.
Which is what you've been doing today. But we always have the problem that we run out of time, because there's so much to talk about with this. It's such a broad topic. And
it is. You only need to touch on each, otherwise you would be there for half an hour per car.
I know. This is the issue we always have. But thank you ever so much indeed, once again, for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe to Planetauto, and obviously to this channel, where we'll be doing more of these slightly shambolic sound recordings. And
let's see what we touch on next week. Have you any ideas?
I don't know.
My camera's just died.
Oh, I better stop recording then.
I was going to say, you could probably cut it there quite easily.